Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming to the COVID-19 meetup and check-in. For those of you who have just joined us, we will be monitoring the chat box. You can see who is in the meeting by clicking on the participants list. And that will open up the participants panel. And then you can also open up the chat box as well and keep an eye on that. We will be keeping people muted for most of the meeting, although you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question if you like. But feel free to also drop your question and comments into the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that throughout. So thank you again for coming to our meeting today. This is being recorded. It will be available on Vimeo afterwards, and you guys can access it there. So to start, I figured we could start again with 3 deep breaths. And unfortunately, Tracy is not here to guide us through this with her wonderfully calming voice. So you get me today. So if you all could just sit up straight wherever you are. If you want to try something new, you can put your hands over your chest and kind of connect to your heart that way. If that's a little too woo-woo for you, you can just put your hands on the tops of your thighs, feet flat on the ground. Try and sit up straight and really open up your chest, and really connect physically to, the feeling of your limbs, the heaviness of your physical body, and let's take some time to kind of calm down our monkey brains. So if we can take in 3 deep breaths, we can start and inhale. And exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And exhale. Awesome. And remember, you can do something called square breathing. If you ever need to take another break like this, where you inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and then exhale for 4 counts. Is that correct? I think that's right. Feel free to correct me in the chat box if that's wrong. But it's a nice way to kind of check in with yourself and make sure that you're feeling okay.
Just don't hold your breath for too long.
Yes, don't hold your breath for too long. It's good to keep breathing. Keeps us alive. So our agenda for today, we have some topics that we got from the last COVID meeting. First off, we're going to be doing a reflection on this whole process so far. So what have we learned? How can we better respond in the future? What are we changing and how are we pivoting to meet current needs? So taking some time to discuss those things. We'll be talking about disaster planning for any future pandemics, which hopefully there won't be any. And then we'll be talking about preparing for a recession. There's going to be quite a bit of economic impact from this, so discussing that. And then the rest of the stuff is talking about new COVID resources and some announcements, and then also having time for general discussion. At any point in time, feel free to jump in with any questions or comments. This time is really for you all to address any issues or topics that are coming up in your daily work. So this is just a general roadmap, but we're welcome to diverge from the path at any point. So for this first part, I believe Suzanne, are you doing this, or was it Pam?
No, actually, it was me.
It was Pam, sorry.
Taking over for Tracy, who is not with us this afternoon because she's in another meeting. But the idea, as Amelia had said, is that we're going to spend some time kind of just reflecting on this of what have we learned so far, because this is a completely new experience, I think, for everybody. So this slide is to get you starting to think about some of these questions, and then we're going to discuss them as we go through the next couple of slides. So think about what do you think the library could be doing differently if another disaster, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic, it could be any kind of disaster in the future. Certainly, and as we open back up again, we could be seeing another wave of COVID-19. So that's something else to consider of if it comes back again, how will we deal with it? Are there some services that we really want to keep, something you've done now, starting to do now that maybe you want to keep because they're really working really well? Or maybe there's some things that we still need to add or you need to add. And then also, this is a good time to think about, are there some things that we can let go of that you have let go of for now and no one's really missing them, or it turns out not to be the disaster, the world has not ended, or maybe there's just a different way we can do things. So those are what the questions are that we were hoping you would start thinking about today, so that in the future we, Montana State Library staff, can be prepared to help all of you even better, because this has been a whole new experience for all of us and we're all reacting as best we can, but it's nice to have a little bit of a plan, or at least think about what we can do in the future to help you and your community. So have a look at this slide and decide what you can do. And now, that's okay, you can move on, Amelia, it's okay. Now let's just hear from all of you of what went well in these past few weeks, things you've changed. Honestly, I love the online story times, but I've also been seeing great videos of library things. So what has gone well? You can put things in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone and speak. I will be sharing this chat with Tracy because she wants to know what all people are talking about. So chat will be helpful. So Mallory says, I would like to see us shut down completely faster. And Carmen says, online craft show and tell. That's what's going really well for Bozeman. I know, that has been pretty fun. I also saw at Bozeman you have an online book discussion thing going, and I missed it the other day. Heather has 1,158 views of their Facebook video posts. Mary Kay says the curbside service is also going pretty well, and there are some communities that are able to do curbside service fairly well, and others are either are choosing not to, or haven't really been able to offer it. Story hours are good, online story. And then the online courses, like Sunny is saying, this is a good time for staff to do the CE training that you don't usually have time for too.
Joe commented she loves seeing librarians recreating book covers,
Yes,
which is really fun.
Yeah.
Going stir crazy. Sunny, I don't think you're the only person.
Yeah, missing the patrons. That's the big thing.
Yeah.
Is that people really just miss, and they miss you.
Yeah. Rhea from Stillwater is saying the online story times have been really well received and had a good bump in interactions on social media posts, which is great. Lori's doing some cleaning, rearranging. Gail from Belgrade is saying virtual STEAM projects, kids get up and move, story time, but also materials mailing service, 3 per week limit.
Well, that's a nice service too.
Yeah.
And Heather's getting the 3D printer figured out.
Cool. That's awesome. Weston says more chances to bring personal vision to social media presentations. Yes, this is a great time to dive into social media stuff if you haven't yet. Kara says, comment from a librarian, we are having trouble providing enough tasks for materials handlers remote work. Ooh, so yeah, if anyone else is struggling with that, or also just providing remote work to people in general to make sure they have things to do, feel free to comment on that. Val says, Kelsey is busy working to upload yearbooks to the MMP. Curbside service is going great, lots of cleaning. Starla
I like
said,
Starla's comment, yes.
I wish we had pushed our community a little harder towards the internet before this. Our community that counts on person-to-person contact has almost no personal contact without the internet. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge a lot of people have been going through.
This is Joe. Let me just add in, I had a spare hotspot that we had purchased a couple of years ago that we aren't using anymore. And I sent it to Kalispell because Connie was looking for, she can't get one for a service that she needs to provide to a homeless shelter. And that's another thing I think we can learn from this is that, like, if you tried to buy a headset right now, you can't get one. If you want, we're just, maybe the library resources that we have were just slightly inadequate to make this transition really quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, Starla's point is well taken.
Exactly.
And I do know that a lot of libraries have worked to expand their Wi-Fi access outside their building to improve it in their parking lot and nearby. But you still have the situation where some people simply don't have a device.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Kit says, and from Bozeman, they love to offer hotspots, but they're unavailable to buy. So yeah, you really, unless you had them ahead of time, it's going to be really difficult to do that, which is too bad because that would be a great service. So going back to the next question then is, what would you do differently? And we have already kind of talked about a few things, but are there things you would do different? Better communication early on from the city would have been nice. That's from Weston and Bozeman also. And like Starla had said about pushing the community towards online internet things earlier, that would be something to think about for the future.
Starla also said T-Mobile offered us a great deal on hotspots and our board voted against in support of our local provider. Perhaps it was a mistake for us. And yeah, I think I'm sure your local provider is very appreciative of you all investing in them as opposed to a big national company. And I think that's something that a lot of communities are struggling with too, where in some cases Walmart's been deemed an essential service, but the small mom and pop shops have not been, and so they're not able to support the local companies. But then, some of the times the services are greater with a bigger company, so that's definitely a trade-off and something to discuss. Heather said, I wish I had stockpiled wipes and hand sanitizer.
And toilet paper,
I think
right?
most
And
people.
toilet paper.
Or had the recipe prepared for making your own hand sanitizer or something, or hooked up with a brewery who could make you some hand sanitizer or something.
Yeah, can't make your own toilet paper.
No, exactly. That's a tough one. That's right.
And Kara says that the state library may have some funding to allocate toward hotspot purchases if and when they are available, and this is likely to go forward to the NAC as a possible budget item for them to consider.
Yes.
We've talked for years at the state library of having, the problem with some of that technology is that, it needs to get used. And so we have to make sure that we have a plan to make sure that it doesn't just sit in a closet waiting for something to happen. And then the other thing is, if as we move on to talk about disaster planning, stockpiling some of this stuff. Right now we have a worldwide disaster. Those are quite unusual. They're usually more local. And we could have a way to share resources, maybe better. That's my suggestion for what we would do differently at the state libraries. We might figure out a way to find out if Heather has a whole bunch of hand sanitizer, we could maybe figure out a way to share that. Yeah. Somebody else has toilet paper. We can,
Sunny apparently has a bunch around
I
her
guess so.
house.
Her house was TP'd and now is worth a fortune. So I love it. Rhea said that she wishes they had explored more online services and trainings because they jumped into online services and are discussing expanded to YouTube and Instagram, and it's been a learning curve for the videos
For sure.
and editing. So yeah, that's one of those things that you wish you knew ahead of time too, instead of trying to learn it on the fly right now. That makes it tricky.
And one quick comment from Kara regarding the hotspot potential use of funding for that. If you think that's a great idea, then please feel free to contact your NAC representative, and you can let them know what you think. And then Lori from Dillon says that Willie's Distillery in Ennis is making hand sanitizer, FDA approved. So that's great.
Awesome.
Abby from Polson says learning all of the legal aspects of posting videos online. YouTube has some specifics for kids materials. Heather says, I'd like to see us better promote how creative/innovative libraries are before a crisis. Yes, that's a really good point. You guys have probably collected already a bunch of, triumphs and wins on both the small and large scale, and you should definitely collect those and have those ready, or start sharing those now about some of the services that you are providing and how valuable they are to people, and how much people are appreciating them. I think it's totally worth it to pat yourselves on the back for the work that you're doing and to share exactly all of the invisible work that's happening, and let people know what you all are doing.
No,
I think I just stopped talking.
Amelia, stop talking.
Which is rare, I know.
Oh, I thought, no, I actually lost it as well. So
yeah, no, I think it was all of us. Yeah, but
now we're back.
So yes, you were saying how everyone needs to pat themselves on the back. We need to collect all of these stories so that we can document all the things libraries were already doing and are stepping up to do more. So I think that's an important thing. Yeah, Starless says, I don't realize how much I depended on print rather than digital copy until I started working from home. Yes.
Yeah.
So. And Jenny has joined us, and she, I'm sure, is going to be very interested in hearing and reporting on these stories. So be sure to keep a little file somewhere where you're keeping evidence of people's comments and how many people are attending. And somebody mentioned all the Facebook action you're getting. I think we're definitely going to want to tell these stories.
I suspect that Jessica Edwards is going to want to collect a lot of that data.
I think so too.
We probably need to start a repository to get that stuff in.
For sure.
Jessica's working on building a variety of different kinds of Tableau workbooks around the different kinds of services that we offer. So absolutely, she's been communicating with various members of our staff to try to collect that information. So please do go ahead and collect those stories, not just for us. I know that at some point, the Montana Library Association is planning to have a panel for the Education Legislative Interim Committee, and they're talking about focusing that panel discussion on all the great work that you're all doing right now.
Stories of the Shutdown.
I like that title. Yeah, Stories of the Shutdown. That's a great title. So yeah,
and that reminds me that the Montana Historical Society just sent out a survey for first person experiences of COVID for both kids, students, and then also adults. So if you are feeling reflective and would like your story recorded for posterity, you can respond to their survey and talk about how COVID has personally affected you, and record your shutdown story.
All right, that was great discussion, and it'll be very helpful moving forward. Thank you to everybody who had something to say. Mary Kay says, I love the idea of hotspot lending through the state library. We have talked about that. And Suzanne said, we're working on it. So hopefully something will come out of that. So the next things to think about would be, what are you offering now that you might want to keep when the library reopens? Maybe you want to continue an online book discussion group, or the online arts and crafts like Bozeman was doing, or what other ideas are out there. But oh yeah, the online library card registration that Kit mentions. And also, you know, what do you think your community members are going to need? And then we want to know, what can MSL help you with? Besides the hotspot lending, which would be great.
Abby mentioned we may keep some of the online services we are testing, like Canopy, Tumblebooks, and Rosetta Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Rhea says we are planning on offering online crafts, STEM, and stream videos and more through YouTube, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think once people get used to some of the online things that they are now kind of forced to use, if they really want to do something, they might really want to keep that up. I don't know how many of your library patrons have taken advantage of that temporary online card that was offered, and so you may get people coming in to get a permanent card when this is all done.
Carmen said it's hard to know what community members might need afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That is very true.
It is true.
And then Heather says, I know job services is getting crushed. Is there possibly a way to partner with them? And that's a really good question. I actually reached out to the Helena Job Services Center to ask about that, and they sent me some resources, some of which we had already included in the COVID-19 Economic Development Guide. Some of them were new, and so I added those in. I asked them, and this was like a very much spur of the moment, like, hey, is this possible? But similar to how some libraries and librarians received training for open enrollment with Obamacare and the health insurance marketplace when it opened, I was like, is that something that might be possible? And I wasn't sure if the library community was actually interested in that, but I wanted to know. And I'm not sure what job services capacity is for providing that training, so it might not be an option. But I know that you all are talking already with many people who are applying for unemployment, and with, you know, all of the coronavirus aid packages and legislation that have been passed, the rules and regulations around that are constantly changing. So I think that's something that the job services is definitely working on. The Department of Labor and Industry here in Montana is issuing many updates daily about new guidance and new regulations on that. So yes, that is something that we are looking into. And if you all have other ideas, any other needs that are showing up, please do let me know, and I can discuss further. But
Well, it seems
yeah.
like, you know, the immediate issue was that we had, you know, a whole bunch of people applying for unemployment all at once. And the system was really meant to handle a few hundred applications a day.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's what Gemma does now. She works over for them and on their tech services. So she might be able to give us some guidance on that, since she knows both of our agencies well. And then the other thing that I think is likely to come next is all of our small businesses who normally would be ramping up for summertime and may not be doing that this year. I talked to a business owner in East Glacier who asked me about what did I know, how he could find out more information about aid or assistance he could get if he doesn't open he rents out rooms. He has 3 guest house rooms that he rents out, and he's thinking about not doing it this summer because both he and his wife have special health risks and they don't want to take the risk. So I think that's probably the next step, is for us to maybe find out what small businesses might be needing and how libraries can help get them to the right spot. So
And there are a few resources I have just included in the Economic Development Guide about that. Ann Booth, our Economic Development Consultant, has been forwarding things that she's been encountering. So there's some regional economic development groups that have like a crisis business toolkit, or community funds that are available, or resources for small business owners. And I have a list at at a later slide that I can go through. But yeah, that is also something that is of high need.
Mm-hmm. Some of the comments that came in while we were all talking about this other topic is from Amy and Bozeman. Once we reopen, there might be some need for some social distancing still, especially for certain people, and online options may continue to be the only option for some of those people. And Starla said she'll continue home delivery to everyone, because that's still a handy idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then from Jenny, we can continue to help people with digital literacy skills, resume building, job skills, etc. And I think those are really good opportunities for lots of libraries to offer, because not everybody has a job service around in their community, so everyone's going to have to come to the library to do a lot of that online applications, even once we are open again. And I guess my last question would be, is there anything that you want to let go of? Have you found something that you don't need anymore, or is not as important, or a workflow or process that isn't as important? Have you seen any changes there that, oh, now there's new ways of doing things and we don't have to do it the way we used to?
Also, just as a reminder, if you all are interested in saving the chat, you can do that at any point in time during this meeting. If you go down to the chat box and there's like a little file and then an ellipse menu, the ... you can click on that and click Save Chat if you want to save this to your computer to keep all the comments.
Mm-hmm. Heather says human interaction is what is most important. We'll focus more on that when we open again. And I think that's what people are really going to want when things open up again. They're going to want that human interaction, that personal, say hi to somebody live right there. That's what's going to be a big thing. All right, you can keep chatting if you want to on this, and we can move on, because I know there's some really good stuff on the next slides too.
Okay, so this next part, disaster planning, is I think Joe.
Yeah, it's me. I'm the disaster. Well, some of you know I used to be an EMT and a firefighter, so I went to lots of disaster planning, and I'm kind of a paranoid person naturally, so this was perfect for me. I have a photo here of our Zoom meeting with staff at the State Library. I thought I'd sort of share all of our pictures as we're trying to stay in touch with each other. I know a lot of you are getting introduced to Zoom for the first time, either on this meetups or just using it yourself for board meetings or whatever. So yes, that's all. Shining happy people. Thank you for saying that, Heather. So I wanted to share my screen here. Let's see if I can get this right, and it'll actually share the correct one, because I often get that wrong. I'm gonna, yeah.
Oh, should I stop sharing my
That's
screen?
okay. I think I can do it. Here it is. Alrighty, I'm going to show you this. Hopefully you see it. The Pocket response plan.
Yes, that's
okay. Great, and I'm going to get this posted so Amelia can include it on her list of her COVID list of resources. This is from the, let's see down at the bottom, it says what's from the Council of State Archivists, COSA, and I've adapted it for Montana libraries, and Stefan is saying we use this and it's pretty cool. I got a call on a Sunday from Gavin in Billings, just as, you know, everything broke for this COVID virus over the weekend. You may remember, like on a Thursday or Friday, we were discussing, should we postpone or cancel MLA or shouldn't we? And then like over the weekend, everything happened. So he called me on a Sunday and said he had actually taken this Pocket Response Plan out of his wallet and used it and totally saved him. So I'm thinking that this is, if you don't have one of these, that this is a really good time to consider creating one and making sure that everyone in your library, every member of your library staff has one of these that's available to them all the time. They generally recommend it folds down into credit card size, and you can just leave it in your wallet, or you know, someplace you can keep a copy on a couple of different computers, because you never know when a disaster is going to happen. They're really unpredictable. Even this one, which we could kind of see coming, was still a surprise when it hit. And so that's why it's important to kind of have access to information that you need immediately. So the idea of this response plan is that over here, let me just see if I can, over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. There. So you have all your staff and everybody's able to contact everyone. So in the case of, say, let's take the State Library as an example, we'd have Jenny up here, and then Evan Hammer, and then her management staff, and then each manager would have a different version of this that would list their supervisors up at the top and the people that report to them, so that you can get a telephone tree going really soon. So if you have to close the library over the weekend and people are not supposed to report to work on Monday, you can make sure that you've contacted everybody so everyone stays safe. This is the second column, is all for your first responders and how to reach everyone. I've included some of the Montana information that's statewide, but also this link here to all of the DES and tribal. DES stands for Department of Emergency Services. Every county has someone who's in this role, and every tribe does. So you might need, in my case, I'd need both of those numbers. And oh gosh, I Centers for Disease Control. I'll go ahead and get that put in before I send it off to you, Amelia. And then you should have a disaster response team at your library. And that's just a group that really, they're paranoid like me, and they think about these things and get together once or twice a year and decide if they should be maybe updating this list, or this is not your full disaster plan at the library, but it's just a quick reference source. A bunch of facilities information, you know, suddenly you have to contact the utility company because you're in the middle of a flood and you want your electric turned off to your building, for instance, but you can't get to the building and reach them. I will tell you that all of your utilities, I learned this as a firefighter, you can call 911 and the dispatcher can contact those people for you. They have all those numbers and they do that routinely. So, and they will get people out very quickly. So if you are having any trouble ever reaching your utilities, you can always call 911. And then I did list some, I listed Jenny's contact information, and I also listed over here WestPass, you'll notice, and Lyrasis. These are two organizations that can help you with recovery of your collections if you sustain any damage. So if there's a flood or an earthquake, or there's smoke damage, these organizations can help you with that. And these are the groups you should be looking to have somebody to contact at your library. You may not need an exterminator in Montana, but you definitely need to know where freezer space is, because if any of your collections, say your special collections that you can't replace, get wet, they have to go in the freezer until they can be properly taken care of so they don't get moldy. And then I did list some Montana resources over here, places for you to put your government contacts. So all your contacts are on one page, and the other page is your emergency plan. So I went through this and kind of adapted it for libraries in Montana. And this all follows a process that emergency planners call an all response plan, which is you, instead of trying to think of how do I plan for an earthquake, how do I plan for a flood, how do I plan for a fire, how do I plan for a tornado, which you might never, those are really rare in Montana. How do I plan for a pandemic? While those may all seem very, very different, a lot of your immediate response, the things you have to do on those first few hours, are the same. And so the all response idea is, don't worry too much about the different types of disasters you may encounter, but think of them as kind of one thing. I'm going to plan for all disasters. I need to make sure all of my staff is safe. First of all, you need to recognize and define what the emergency is. You need to notify public authorities, and you need to ensure that all your staff and your patrons are safe. And those things are going to happen in any disaster. So I'm going to share this and suggest that one of the things you can give some of your staff to do, because sometimes this is better done not by the director, but start by your staff. They're kind of more intimate sometimes with library operations, and they can contribute a lot. And get them to fill this out for you, and then just approve it and make sure that everybody in your library has a copy. It's great to share with your trustees as well. So that's that, and I'm just going to pass it back to you. I think you can do that. I'm going to pause my share.
Okay, great. And then I'll just reshare my screen. And thank you, Joe, for that. That's a super nifty little resource there, and will be helpful for future.
Some of you are quite familiar with it because we did some disaster planning a couple of years ago with the National Network for Libraries of Medicine. We did an all-day training, and this was one of the things they presented. And then if you've ever been to any of the WestPass trainings that have occurred in Montana, those are the 3-day document recovery trainings. They really promote the pocket disaster plan as well. Ready.gov is an excellent resource. You should also consider sharing this with your patrons. There are really good resources for individuals to plan for their families, and so it's also one of the reasons I wanted to talk about disaster planning is that planning for your next disaster should start as soon as you're past the crisis point, which is where I hope we are right now. And it'll help you kind of move into the recovery mode if you are thinking about, well, what have I learned from this? And what am I going to do differently next time? And how can I be better prepared? So that's my question to you is, what do you know now? And Pam asked this too, that you wish you had known way back in February. What's the one thing?
Yeah, and if people want to share that, I mean, that would be, I think, a great collection of things to draw upon as we draft plans going forward.
Weston mentioned earlier in the chat about, better communication from his city government. And, part of that, the plan is to make sure that you have all that contact information. And it's really nice to call up your city manager or your police department and say, hey, before we get on to our next disaster, I want to make sure I have a way to contact you if we ever need to. Of course, you can always dial 911 for any emergency, but oftentimes you might need to have a conversation with the police department or the fire department that is not really an emergency. You just want to know something. So it's good to keep a contact for those folks that is not a 911 call.
Alice says she would want a list of the essential materials to take home in order to do remote work. That is a very good
yes,
idea.
That is. Well, it was, as we were kind of leading into we knew that remote work, I remember Jenny sending out a note to everybody. We use a double authentication system to log into our email. It involves putting in a little number that's on this little device that you have to carry around with you if you're going to use it. Well, people who don't work from home leave those things at work because they don't need them at home, and they certainly don't want to lose them. But if you didn't have it and the building closed, now I bet a lot of those people who are working from home will keep those devices with them all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, Alice is saying she forgot her headphones. There is a point. Yeah, without you've got your headset, it's a work thing. You really need it at home.
Mm-hmm.
And like Abby says, we should always keep a significant amount of supplies on hand rather than waiting to order when you're almost out. So you are a little more prepared. I think that's a really good idea too.
After I went to disaster planning, one of the things they suggested was you should never let the gas in your car get below a half a tank.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was always one of these people who ran it down to empty, but I never do anymore, and that's the same thing with other supplies that we just don't think about. Toilet paper and hand sanitizers, like don't wait until you're completely out. Okay, well, I'll share the Pocket response plan, and I'm waiting for Jenny to say, yeah, Joe, why don't you make one for us? That'll probably be my project for the rest of the week.
Sounds good.
I'm halfway there.
Thanks so much, Joe. And a few more comments from the chat box. Starla said, communication in our community right now is a critical issue. So many are still looking for the little newspaper at the end of the grocery counter. We have to work at getting communication up in our community. Yes. So creating alternative channels and maintaining those channels so that you can use them in the future and are able to push out information when you can.
I want to add, some libraries are using their front door as kind of a bulletin board right now.
Right.
Yep.
And I know that in my town, the bulletin board at the post office is where we all go to look for information. So yeah, it's amazing how sometimes you fall back to old school stuff when things happen.
Analog. All right, cool. We'll move on. So the next topic we're going to talk about is libraries and recessions. And in our last meeting, we talked about how there is probably going to be a recession. And I wanted to share some research with you all. There was a recession back in 2007 through 2009, which I believe is now called the Great Recession. And there were a bunch of reports that came out of this time period about how library usage changed during the recession. So I've linked a lot of these here, and I'll drop those links into the chat box as well. But I encourage you to take a look at all of these because it's really fascinating to see the direct correlation between the economy shrinking and people going to the library and using everything that they can for free. So there's a couple of case studies I've included in here, one from Colorado, and a couple news articles, as well as just a general national report from OCLC. But it's really great to look at that and understand what people are experiencing in their lives and how that translates to library services and changes in use. So let me actually do that right now. I will stick these into the chat box so that you all can take a look at these.
So Abby's question, actually there have been some other comments. We talked about Starless communication. Jennifer said the city of Choteau and Teton County are just learning to use social media. So that has been helpful to them. Abby asks, can we talk about plans that are being put in place for reopening, which I think we might have as a topic for next week.
Yes, I think so. And I guess that kind of goes along with like the reflection part too, as you're starting to think about the future, what things do you want to do for sure when you're reopening, and what things do you not want to do for sure as you're doing that. And in the last session, I think Great Falls was kind enough to share a preliminary draft of their reopening plan. And if anyone else is drafting a plan, you are more than welcome to send it to us, and we can post it and make it available for people who are interested in looking at that. Because there probably will be some things that maybe won't apply to every library, but there are other things that I think most people would appreciate having other opinions on what to do. Abby asked, can we find the Great Falls plan online? I don't think so. I don't think it's actually been approved or confirmed yet, but I will contact Susie. I think she just shared it in the chat last time, but I'll ask her if she's willing to share a copy somewhere and make it available to you all. Abby says, my fear is that the stay at home will suddenly be lifted and we will be expected to reopen with very short notice.
I think there are a lot of libraries that are thinking about how to reopen and developing kind of a staged, different stages of opening, like when the stay at home is lifted, we will offer these kind of services, and at some point then we'll move on to the next level of services. Mm-hmm. You know, a larger library, when all those books get returned, you know, especially large libraries are going to have a ton of books that are returned. They're all going to have to be quarantined somewhere for either 3 days, 5 days, whatever you come up with. So you need to find a place for those. So I would think, okay, my meeting room is going to be full of books that are being quarantined for several days, so I'm not going to be able to offer meetings at first, or I'm not going to be able to offer story times yet because we don't want that many people in the library. Or are you going to do I only allow 10 people in my library at a time, so I have to have somebody outside counting people coming in and out. So be thinking of that kind of thing. And I think, you know, I think we could have a whole meeting next week or sometime about this.
I was going to suggest that. I think that's a good topic for our next meeting is, you know, what as I was doing the research for disaster recovery and disaster planning, I came across some resources too that had to do with also just the trauma that staff have experienced. And you know, some people are laid off, and then coming back to work will require them to kind of reorganize their life a little bit. And so, yeah, we should be sharing some ideas about this, and maybe I've started to collect some things, and I shared them with Tracy this afternoon. So maybe by next week we can.
For sure. And Jody has put a good link in the chat box of a staged library response, so people could save that one right now. But yeah, I think next week for sure.
Yeah. Oh, Jody says that's the file for Great Falls.
No wonder it sounded familiar. Okay, thank you.
And just to let people know, the Great Falls, this plan that Jody just shared has not been approved, and it's not been, I think it's very much in the beginning stages. So you know, don't make it like publicly available, because I don't think Great Falls has voted on it yet or anything, but that's some of the initial ideas that they're considering.
Yes.
And Kara says that surveys seem to suggest that citizens are not going to be eager to rush back into communal activities immediately. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You know, don't go planning a big shebang for people to come to, because people might not be willing to have that exposure. So yeah. Laura asked, is it something that we can share with staff? I think that's probably fine, right?
I think so. I think that was part of.
Susie gave permission for us to share it with staff. That's fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I did stick these links to these reports in the chat box, so feel free to take a look at those, and we'll also send these links out with this PowerPoint and with the Vimeo link when we do this. But I do encourage you to take a look at. There's some of those statistics are really fascinating and can give you a good idea of what to expect. And so here are some of the main trends that happen. Basically, everything will go up. So circulation will go up. People are going to check stuff out. Computers, internet access usage is going to increase, and then programming attendance is going to increase as well. So this is a great opportunity for you all to up the publicity about what services you have, what people can access, what kinds of things you provide, and letting people know that you are there for them to use. So along with, reopening, and as things hopefully go back to normal, perhaps creating an outreach plan, an aggressive outreach plan, to get the word out there to people who might not have come into the library beforehand, but now really find themselves in need of those kinds of information sources. Lori had asked, how are libraries going to perform if kids can't go back to school? And Joe replied, childcare in school is a concern before staff can come back to work for certain. And I know talking with some libraries, because at least right now, I guess there is, online learning and some sort of structure for students to participate in, but once school is finished for the semester, and of course, we're not really sure what that's going to look like, people have discussed using summer reading as a way to give structure in the same way that online learning has happened with schools. So that could be a potential. Laura had asked what kinds of programs are people going to be interested in when we reopen. And in some of the reports that I shared the links to, there was a lot of stuff about financial literacy. So basic budgeting, getting a hold of your finances, filing taxes. I'm not sure if, I know that the deadline for tax filing has been pushed back, but I'm not sure how much will have been changed due to the disruption in the economy and in people's incomes and all of that. So that might be something worth looking into. Maybe just even increasing your current programming suite and making more sessions available once it does become safe and okay for people to publicly congregate. I'm sure people will be wanting that face-to-face interaction and will be coming to whatever in order to get that. Some other ideas I saw were sort of do-it-yourself, budget-conscious, like create your own soap or create your own detergent or make your own whatever, so people can save money that way. An interesting thing I saw was showcasing side hustles. So the ways that people earn money outside of work, of their normal working hours. And then career reboot classes, digital literacy, and of course, just asking your patrons and seeing what they're interested in. Yeah, Cindy said, I think asking our communities what they want is important. Do they want entertainment, meeting basic needs, or mental health programs, etc.? Jennifer said, with school not in session and parents returning to work, libraries may be a gathering place for kids, so this should be part of your opening plan too. Suzanne says, low density public programming, fewer participants, social distancing will probably remain for some time. So all of these things are good to consider in the future. And then something else that was brought up in these reports was some interesting challenges from the library administration side. So even though there's going to be a definite increase in library usage, that will not necessarily translate to increased dollars, unfortunately. So, and especially in, economic downturn, I think, understandably from a PR perspective, it's difficult to ask people for money and to ask people to invest in services. And so that's going to be a sort of unique and challenging advocacy opportunity. So starting to think of ways to address that. So informing the public of how the usage has increased and what people are using. How are you planning on reallocating funds or using funds? And maybe a wish list of what you could do with extra support. So in the reports from OCLC, they were saying how in the Great Recession, even though there was such higher usage of the library, the majority of public libraries in the countries had flat or decreased funding, which led to reduced hours and all of that. So that's something to just be aware of, that that might be something that we all have to consider going forward. So a few more comments in the chat. Let's see. Oh, Jody says, Cindy, I think the community will say yes to all of the things that they want. They'll have to be careful in deciding what we can actually offer based on staff and funding. Colleen asked, speaking of summer reading, is there any more talk about a special webinar for alternative plans and ideas? And yes, there is. There's one scheduled for this Friday, the 17th, from 12 to 1 p.m. And Joe, thank you, will be getting the link for that webinar to stick into the chat box. So that will just be a brainstorming session to talk about what people are planning for summer reading. So come and discuss with everybody. Okay, so I know we're reaching almost the top of the hour. A few new COVID resources to highlight. So this is for the Economic Development Guide, and I've included the link here. The Department of Labor and Industry has released a remote workforce toolkit, as well as the Coronavirus Aid and Relief and Economic Security Act guidance and information. So that includes stuff about expanded unemployment benefits, who qualifies, et cetera, et cetera. Here are some regional resources for small businesses. So Grow Great Falls has a crisis toolkit and COVID-19 resources page. The Business Emergency and Assistance Recovery Program from Initiative has some resources as well. Big Sky Economic Development has a COVID-19 resources page. The Montana Community Foundation has available funds that people can access. The job services locations, all of them are offering assistance via phone and email. So I do know that some libraries do not have a local job services center, but you can call one near you or email someone that way, and they've been providing assistance that way. And then the Department of Labor and Industry is also hosting virtual town halls on Facebook. So the link to their Facebook page is in the COVID Economic Development Guide. And it's unclear if that's happening on like a regular basis or just depending on if need arises. But they recently had one, I think this morning, about the CARES Act for employers and employees, for people to ask questions and get specifics. So it'd be great to encourage people to follow that page. And they also provide short updates on applying for unemployment and also how the CARES Act will be enacted in Montana and the rules and regulations regarding that. So that's a good way to stay updated. And then the job services, and Helena sent me this last one, the National Labor Exchange, they have a virtual job section and then Need a Job Now. So for people who are looking for something to do either remotely or locally, they can look at those two resources and try and get assistance there. So all of these links are in the COVID Economic Development Guide, and let me actually grab that guide link and put that in the chat box. And I will be updating this whenever something new comes in. So make sure to check back regularly, because I am adding in new stuff pretty much daily or every other day, I believe.
Amelia, could I jump in really quick?
Yeah, sure.
While we're talking about these different kinds of resources, I wanted to let you all know that I had a call from Kim Anderson from Humanities Montana yesterday, and they have also received some CARE Act funds. They are waiting for guidance still from the National Endowment for Humanities on exactly how they can spend those funds, but she said that libraries are an included benefactor in the funds that are going to be available through them. They believe they're still waiting to know exactly what kinds of priorities the NEH wants them to use those funds on. But Kim is anticipating some kind of small grant program that libraries would likely be able to apply for. Kim said the maximum amount of funds they're starting to talk about would be about $5,000. So she said she recognizes that's not a lot of money, but it's something that could go to help libraries as you're thinking about some of these kinds of questions about what the future looks like for us. She asked if there was any feedback from libraries about how you might use small grants, that we pass that kind of information on to her as they're beginning to think about what these opportunities might look like. So my ask of you is that if you think you might be able to use a small grant fund for a specific purpose, if you could email that information. Amelia, I'm going to ask them to email that to you, and we can collate that and get that to Kim Anderson. This is something that we'll be developing probably in the month of May. And then as we learn more about the grant program, we'll be sharing that information with all of you. You know, I think one thing to be thinking about is the kinds of resources that you might want to be able to help support in an economic recovery. Whether or not, for example, you might need to update some of your hardware, your computers, that kind of thing in your library if you're expecting more people to be coming in, applying for unemployment or developing new resumes, taking skills classes, that kind of thing. So just a request to all of you to help us help Humanities Montana in their work to reach out to libraries.
Yeah, and I can definitely compile that and send it over to Kim. So feel free to email me with whatever thoughts and ideas you have.
Amelia, this is Joe. I just want to remind people that the MLA webinar series starts tomorrow, and it will be every Thursday, 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock. So I'm getting those posted into Aspen's events, Aspen's being difficult, but I will get them all in, but tomorrow's are in, so go check those out.
Yes. There is another slide in here about general COVID-19 resources, but it is 4 p.m. So if you all need to go, feel free to head on out. There's some resources from the 0 to 5 Montana organization. They have a resources page, and then they also have a family survey that they are hoping families across Montana will take. This is recurring so that they can get a snapshot from week to week about how people are coping. There are some virtual storytime webinar recordings from Massachusetts and Colorado from those state libraries. Lewis and Clark, if you saw on Wired, has a super cool Mail to Our Seniors program, so I've included that press release in the guide. Montana 211 has community resources, and then Suzanne also sent out the National Network of Libraries of Medicine digital health literacy programming resources, so you can take a look at that as well. And then as Joe had mentioned, there are the MLA online sessions that are coming up. So you can see the upcoming titles of the webinars here. There is a summer reading brainstorm, as I mentioned, on Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. There's a virtual story times and programming sharing session on Tuesday, the 21st from 11 to 12 p.m. And then on May 6th, there's going to be a Little Hands Signing Professional Development Story Time, and it will focus on feeling signs. So if you're interested in working sign language into your story time, feel free to come to that. Kathy McMillan will be leading that session. And then
I need to make a quick correction. That life cycle one is actually next week.
Is it? Okay.
Aspen has been difficult.
Okay, so
it's finally correct.
Never mind.
Tomorrow morning is communication at 10 a.m. Yes.
At communication at 10 a.m.
Yes.
And then a real quick update, and we'll discuss this more on Friday for Beanstack versus ReadSquared and online tracking software. There are demo links and webinars, and you can test out the apps for both of these on your phone. I sent that email out on Wired, but if you didn't receive that, feel free to email me and I can send you that information. We would love your input on which one you prefer, which one you like. And we finally got some quotes back. There were 20 libraries who were interested in this, and the difference in pricing is $6,000 from ReadSquared for 20 libraries to subscribe for a year, and then $20,000 from Beanstack for 20 libraries to subscribe for a year. So that's just some general information for you all to consider. Beanstack also, I think they have said that their timeline might be a little bit protracted. They're hoping to shoot for June for libraries that sign up, but I think you were supposed to commit by today in order to maybe guarantee a start date of June 1st. So libraries that sign up after today could maybe see a start date of mid-June or even July, and I don't know if that timeline will determine viability of which program to participate in. Read Squared, I believe, said that they can get up and running within 2 weeks from installation to implementation. So that's another thing to consider regarding the timeline. So again, we will be discussing this some more on Friday, but just to give you some pricing, because I do know that that does affect decisions as well. So yeah, feel free again to save the chat file. Again, you can do that with the little ... menu in the chat box. You can just save it to your computer. We will be sending out these links to people so you can have them in email form as well. And the recording will be made available afterwards as well. So we'll stay online for a little bit longer. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.